this computer. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Shark Tank negotiations session. I've been a negotiator for 30 years with clients. I've been studying the subject for 30 years, including going to Harvard Business School, and I've been teaching and coaching people and helping them with their negotiations. So I'm going to share some of the stories that I have come across. Some are almost unbelievable, and some are just kind of regular things. One of the things we have to think about is what happens ethical or unethical? And I'm going to ask you that sometimes during it, and it's U for unethical and it's E for ethical in the chat box. The other question you have to ask yourself is lying acceptable when people are negotiating? And I did ask one or two people that question, and the more aggressive business people said, well, of course it is, and other people said, no, it's not. So we need to understand whether people are telling fibs or not. And I tend to rate those both on a scale of 0 to 100. What's a little white lie compared with a dreadful, horrible lie? And of course, cooking the books can be pretty unethical as well, as we know with companies like Carillion that have got into trouble. Patisserie Valerie had a big hole in their accounts, and so on and so forth. And I was involved with Dame Brenda Dean, who told me she'd been negotiating with Maxwell and Maxwell actually bugged the lifts going up and down in Mirror Group News headquarters, which used to be in Holborn Circus, which is now Sainsbury's. And I said, really? And she said, really, Derek, just watch my lips. I'll tell you the whole truth. She said Maxwell also had the home phone number of every chairman and chief executive of important companies, particularly the banks. I said, really? She said, yes, really, Derek, will you stop asking me that question? And she said, he rang me up at 3 o'clock one morning to try and get my agreement to something. If you remember Brenda Dean, she was the chief executive of the SOGAT print union in the 80s that was doing all sorts of things with the printing, etc. Now, it's a little known fact that good negotiators earn twice as much as average negotiators. I came across this fact when I was studying at the Headley Business School, and I already had a plan to leave my full-time employer as at the first opportunity. And I thought, well, studying negotiation, that's got to be for me, because I want to double my salary. So I've got enough money to leave at the right time to be in control of my life, because we all need the walk away factor to be able to walk away from things if we're negotiating. And Carol Dweck, in her book Mindset, which is a fabulous book and worth reading, says you can't really be in business unless you are a good negotiator. So let me tell you about Mike. Mike worked with me, and Mike came in one day looking a bit pale, and he said, Derek, we're going to lose £10 million. I said, what, Mike? What are you talking about? He said, we're going to lose £10 million. We've got a £10 million loan and we didn't take the security. I said, what do you mean we didn't take the security? He said, we forgot to take the security. I said, Mike, you're having a laugh. Don't wind me up. He says, I'm not winding you up. This is the facts. And he says, I'm going to have to leave it with you to tell people, because I'm on holiday from tomorrow. This is about 5:30 in the afternoon. I said, Mike, you really are having a laugh now, aren't you? And we went through the facts, and we had forgotten to take the security. I don't think the client encouraged us to take the security, and it was a very, very iffy situation. Anyway, Mike goes off on his golf tour, leaving me with his mobile phone number, and I go in to tell the boss. I said, boss, we've got a bit of a problem. We could lose £10 million. Well, you can imagine what happened. And this was a big cigar smoking, whiskey swilling, big guy who didn't take prisoners, alpha male, off the scale. So I'm sort of backing off in his room. I tell him the facts, and he said, well, we better go and see them. And he said, if it's Mike's fault, where's Mike? I said, oh, he's playing golf with the chief executive of the bank in Cornwall at the West Cornwall Golf Club. He says, well, get him back here as fast as you can. I said, well, okay, but it is Cornwall. He says, I know how far Cornwall is. Get him back here. So I'll ring up Mike, better get back here. I haven't got a suit or anything. Get back anyway. Mike comes back from Cornwall. And to cut a long story short, and the reason I'm telling you this story, we got the money back. But we got the money back by going to Paris and meeting the people that, one of the parties that was defaulting on the debt. And during that meeting, we were definitely bugged. We were definitely set up. We were definitely given a time deadline to do the deal. And we were offered £1 million in full and final settlement. They also spoke in French between themselves, but luckily we'd already planned to have a French speaking person with us. So was that ethical? Don't know. They were French negotiators. The French have a reputation for hardball negotiating. Look at who puts in the paper every day about the Brexit negotiations going nowhere. So that was an interesting opening to my negotiation skills. So I'd like to know, I'm going to set up a poll now. I'm going to launch a poll and put in the poll question should have come up in your box now. How do you see yourself as a negotiator? Are you a beginner? Are you intermediate? Or are you good? There's the question. Ali, wave at me if that's come up in the poll box. Thanks. Brilliant. So the results of the poll are slowly coming in. I will pass that on to the side. Second negotiation I wanted to tell you from my Shark Tank experiences was with a company in Littlewoods, a big retailer in Littlewoods. I couldn't possibly tell you who it was, but it was the only one at the time that had offices. I think their name might have been Littlewoods, but I might have got a bit muddled up on that. We used to do a lot of work for Littlewoods, and this particular negotiation, they called my assistant and they said, if Derek thinks he's coming up here to give us a price rise, he'll get straight back on the train at Lime Street Station, straight back to London. We're fed up with these blokes coming up from London, bossing us around and telling us what to do. We really want to negotiate with people in Liverpool. So I'm thinking, I'd started studying the subject and I thought, here we go, good guy, bad guy routine here. You know, the good guy rings up the assistant, tells the bad guy, scares the pants off of you. I went in to see my boss. I said, this is it. He said, Derek, get up there and just go ahead. We want a 6% rise on what we're doing. And inflation was high. That was lower than inflation. And up we went. Anyway, I went with one of the guys that worked with me, Martin. Martin was another cigar smoker. People smoked cigars in those days. Anyway, he was pretty cool. And he said, Derek, remember, when I've been up there on my own, they will flinch at whatever price you put on the table. I said, what do you mean flinch? He said, they go, wow. So he said, don't laugh when they do that because I'm tipping you off, but that's what will happen. So up we went there. We're in the meeting, 4 of them, 2 of us, 4 on one side, 2 of us. And I put the price on the table. You know, people usually flaff around when they put the price on the table. And the guy throws himself back and bashes his head on the wall. And I'm really trying not to laugh here because this was really funny. You know, we knew it was going to happen. Off he went, bloody hell, that's crazy. And bashes his head on the wall. And I think he must have hurt himself. Anyway, to cut on another story, to cut the story short, I'll get my words tied up in a minute. They accepted something like a 4.5% pay rise, and that doesn't matter. And this was a long time ago. So, but it was a good story. And when you're negotiating with retailers, they know. Oh boy, do they know how to negotiate. Now I'm going to hand you over to Ali, the physio, who's there and live, sitting in her home, not able to do any physio at the moment, to give us one tip on what we should be doing on the 8th week of lockdown. Ali, are you there?
Hi, Derek. Yes, I'm here. Hello, everybody. Great to see you all. So today I thought I'd talk a little bit about the lower body, because we've been going on for the last few weeks about sitting properly and turning our heads and moving, etc. But a lot of people are getting lower backache. And I think one of those reasons is because they're getting very tight in their hip flexors. And for those of you who don't know what a hip flexor is, it's the big muscle that fixes on, I'm going to stand up, on your pelvis at the front and goes right down to your knee. Now these get tight when you walk, when you do anything, but when you're sitting in a rounded position, they're always a bit shorter than they should be. So you need to stretch these out at least once a day. And you can do that just by, you can hold on to something, bringing your foot up and just pushing your hip forward. I don't know if you can see that my knee's up here somewhere.
Yeah.
It's up there somewhere. And then you just push your hip forward and you get a nice stretch all down through there. You can also do it just by standing with one leg a little bit behind, one in front, and pushing your bum forward so you get a nice stretch down the front of your leg. Now, if you loosen that off, it means your pelvis is in a better position, and it means that your back will not have so much strain on it. So the first tip for today is to actually work out, are you a bit tight in the hip flexors? If I were to do a poll, I think most people would say, no idea. And if I looked at you all, I would say, yes, I think you probably have got tight hip flexors because it's very common. So that's tip number one, stretch your hip flexors, hold them for 10 to 15 seconds and breathe slowly and make sure you don't arch your back too much. And then when Derek's done a bit more talking, I'll tell you about the other muscle that I think is important to stretch for your lower back.
Fantastic, Ali. Thanks very much for that. I better get stretching. I sometimes use Ali as in my negotiations, because one of the things you might do in a negotiation that's going on for a long time is stand up and stretch. What that does is messes around with other people's brains, because they think, why is he stood up? We've all been sitting down quite comfortable, and I say, oh dear me, bit of a bad back, been going to the physio for 20 years. She tells me to stretch it every 20 minutes. Do excuse me, and then I might have a little walk around the room. Now, another pal of mine did something which probably is a serious Shark Tank negotiation. In a syndicated loan meetings, he used to walk right round the room like that without making any excuse whatsoever, and he used to look over the shoulder of the people that had their papers there, and very often they were stupid enough not to cover their papers up, and they often had their walkaway position and their best position, target position, which I've talked to you a bit about before, there. And he said, I could see it. I could see when they said, no, we can't go any lower than that. And I could see they could, and I couldn't believe it. And I said, did they put up with you walking around the back without standing up? He said, yeah, every time. No one ever moved or argued. So that's another little tip from Alison. If you've got, remember to stand up every 20 minutes, 25 minutes or whatever, stretch your back. And if you're in a meeting, why not do it? Now the poll results are in. We have 31% of people are beginners, 44% of people are intermediate, and 25% are good. So on that research from Henley, the good people should be earning at least twice as much as the beginners. But here's my challenge for the beginners. Get yourself up to speed with negotiating, keep negotiating, send me what you're doing. I'll give you a little bit of coaching on it, and we'll see if you can get what you're earning up a bit. I wouldn't try it too quick after lockdown though. I would be a little bit more careful about that. I write about salary negotiations in Win-Win. The third Shark Tank negotiation I wanted to tell you about, I was further on in my negotiating career at this stage. I got called in to a retailer in Baker Street, and it's not the one you think that's in Baker Street. It was nearby Baker Street in the Marylebone Road, because the bank I was working for wouldn't go in for the full amount that they wanted in a syndicated loan facility. Our credit people didn't like it. I couldn't get agreement, and actually I didn't really want agreement. So I got summoned in to get a rollicking from the finance director. So the finance director was there and the treasurer. They give me a rollicking and they send me out with a flea in my ear saying, we expect your bank to come in for the full amount. And I said, look, that's not going to be possible. I can't go back to the people because we won't. Anyway, we go back, the loan facilities come out, the draft loan facilities, and I say to, I think it was Mike again, I said to Mike, how much is it for? And he said, 60 million. I said, it can't be 60 million. We said, we're only going to do half of that. He said, it says 60 million here. So actually, even though we said it was going to be 30, the loan document that had been sent to every bank had the wrong figure in it. And I'm thinking, we could assign that very, very easily, because those of you that know that have been through loan documents before, you kind of see what it is, and then you don't think it might be changed at the last minute. So be very, very, very careful with contracts, and don't leave the contracts to your lawyer. Make sure you read them yourself. As I always say to people, get the drains up. There's no substitute for preparation. You need to get the drains up and see what's underneath the drains. Was that ethical or unethical? E for ethical, U for unethical. In the chat box, please. The chat box is locked, is it? How can I lock the chat box? I don't even know how to lock the chat box. Gee whiz.
That was a reminder to tell you to lock the room.
Oh, lock the room. Okay, I've unlocked the chat box as well. Thank you. Yeah. I've locked the room. Oh, so some people say that was ethical to change the contract, and some people say it was unethical. That's interesting, isn't it? I was pretty cross about that. So I went out to Dubai in the UAE to run a course for a massive UK engineering company that does a lot of work in United Arab Emirates. And lady came into the room for the course. I said, "Oh, do you do much negotiating?" And she said, "Oh yeah, I do a lot." She said, "Have you ever been in difficult negotiations?" She said, "I'm always in difficult negotiations. The UAE is a very difficult place to negotiate. There's a lot of alpha males and alpha females out here who expect to get their own way, particularly with British companies." I said, "Oh, have you got a story to tell me?" She said, "Yeah, I have actually." She said, "I went to a meeting in Abu Dhabi, which, as you know, is about 50 miles down the road from Dubai." She said, "And there were 33 people at the meeting on the other side." And I said, "No, you couldn't be." And she said, "Yeah, I am." You know, when you say you couldn't be and they're telling you the truth, they get really, really upset about that. She said, "Yeah, there was 33 people because this was a big construction project, and we were the lead engineers, the lead advisors on it. Big syndicating issue, and it had all gone a bit wrong." And she said, "Yeah, there were 33 people all lined up against me." And then they started the negotiations. And they said, "Because of what you've done wrong, you're responsible for killing 5 construction workers." I said, "What?" They actually said that in the negotiation. She said, "That's exactly what they said." I said, "How did you handle it?" Because this lady was about 33. She was pretty seasoned. I said, "Well, why didn't you take someone to the negotiation with you?" That's kind of what people do. She said, "That's why I'm on the course, Derek." Never thought of that. It was my responsibility, my job. I said, "You've always got to take someone with you so they can watch the body language, they can support you both emotionally and with facts, etc., etc." Another story out of the United Arab Emirates. The chief operating officer of a company I do a lot of work for got a call at Paddington Station about a bad debt at 7:25 a.m. in the morning. And they said, "We're in the boardroom in Dubai. We've got the directors here, and we would like a letter from you confirming we don't owe you any money. And for that, we're prepared to offer you £1 million." So my client smelt a rat, is a good negotiator. Why 7:25? Why the boardroom? Oh, and by the way, you've got till 8 o'clock to accept our offer. If not, all offers are off the table. Well, they'd written this debt off. People knew all the debts that for this particular construction company had been written off by most companies for the stock exchange. So by accepting it and being fooled by the Shark Tank negotiation tactic, it would have been easy to have accepted it and said to your company, "Look, I've just got you another £1 million back. Aren't I clever?" But Jeff, who's a pretty smart operator and shares all his best stories with me, and in fact he helped me run the course 10 times because he was trying to get it across to these people that they needed to be stronger in the negotiations, said, "No, I can't do that, I can't accept that, etc., etc." Anyway, to cut a long story short, he went back several times. They used the same tactic. We're in the board meeting, we can't raise it any more than 4 million or whatever the figure was. And he kept saying no, no, no. And what's really interesting, I was reminded of this book by listening to some tapes on Saturday. Tapes, I do mean tapes, by Harvey Mackay. Swim with the Sharks Without Getting Eaten, which gave me the thought for the title of today. And he says, just keep saying no. People want something, just keep saying no, 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 no. Can't do it at that price. Can't get that past my colleagues. No, 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 no. So how are we doing on time? We're doing all right on time. Time for another story before we let we let Alison. Pop concerts. Do we get Shark Tank negotiation tactics with pop concerts? Glastonbury will be sold out in a minute if you don't get online. 200,000 people going to Glastonbury, sold out in a minute. Is that a Shark Tank negotiation tactic? Yeah, of course it is, because the tickets then appear on Viagogo at twice the price. Do you think the owners of Glastonbury or the Rolling Stones or whoever, when they play these things, really put them on and you can't get on the website, and no one can get on the website, but you have to buy it via Viagogo or whatever rip-off website? Yeah, of course. And the other thing is with pop concerts, only one concert. But if you actually got behind the scenes, you'd find that Wembley had also been booked for 3 concerts, but they only released one concert at a time. One concert at a time. And when that's fully booked and sold out at whatever rip-off ticket price it is, £200, then suddenly another date becomes available. So these things are going on all the time. The last thing I wanted to tell you before Ali comes in and I answer a few questions is books in the book charts. Do you really think that people have bought the books that are at #1 in the charts? Or do you think product placement with WH Smiths, who get a great big fee for putting a book at #1 in Waterloo or wherever it is no, it's not that people have bought them. They will buy it, of course, because I see it as #1, and we've all bought books. Will Kintish and I have both had a book published by Pearson, and when Pearson said to me, well, we'll pay for your book to be in the business book charts for a month, but if it doesn't sell that well, that'll be in it. I said, what do you mean pay? They said, pay, you have to pay to have books in the business book charts and in the charts. I said, you're joking, aren't you? He said, no, we're not joking. That's how it works. You're renting space in WH Smith's at #1, and the highest bidder that rents the space at #1 gets to be #1. I said to Sally, my wife, and she said, these books I've been reading, are you really telling me that they weren't really at #1? I said, well, that's the way it is. And as you know, in Sainsbury's and Tesco's, product placement goes on the end aisles and they bid for the space, etc. And retailers make a lot of money at that sort of thing. So there was a number of Shark Tank tactics used there. All I'm saying to everybody here is, A, we need to be aware of them. B, I'm not suggesting you use any of those type of tactics, but they're going to be used on you at some stage in business. And while Ali's doing her physio, I wanted to ask you one question. Do you think it's ethical or unethical to say to a client, I've got 3 offers on this, yours one of them. I think you should sharpen your price if you really haven't got 3 offers. You've only got the one. Is that ethical or unethical? Ali, what's tip 2?
Okay, so tip 2 is all about your glutes or your bottom muscles and your piriformis muscles. So they're the big muscles that control the bottom of below the bottom of your back and help move your hips, etc. And they get very tight from sitting as well. And to stretch them, actually, the easiest is lying on the floor, but I can't show you that. So I'm going to just put my screen down a little bit lower, I hope. And I'm going to show you, maybe we have to go even lower. Sorry about this, chaps. So you can just sit on your chair and you can put your foot over onto your lap like that. Sit up straight, nice straight back. And I should do this on the side nearest to the screen, I think. And then you get a nice stretch round through there if your leg is across there. And you can make it a bit better by just pushing down a little bit. If you have problems with your hips, please be careful with it. But actually, if you do have problems with your hips, this can be a really excellent exercise to get the stretch going in the gluteal muscles. So the message today was really about, sitting around a lot. You do need to, goodbye everybody. You do need to think about where you are and what's happening to your muscles and what you can do to keep them stretched. And I think my top tip is the hip flexor, but the glute also could do with a good stretch. And there's many other stretches, but I could be here for hours if I told you about those. I will say that in the negotiating question, I did tick good because I didn't think Derek would let me hear the last of it because he taught me how to negotiate. For years, he's taught me how to negotiate. So there we go. Piriformis stretches, glute stretches, and hip flexor stretches. Thank you.
And I remember you being very cross at one negotiation, Alison, when one of the medical insurers was insisting that you did 30-minute appointments rather than 45-minute appointments, because I know you're an ethical physiotherapist, and what you can get done in that sort of 25 minutes is really tricky when they were cutting back.
It's true, yeah. And we did have, are you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we did have to, you actually helped me with that a lot, because I told them, I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to compromise. And they did actually back down a bit. So that was good. Thank you. Yeah,
because we have to stand up to people, but we have to stand up to people when we're negotiating in a non-confrontational way. That's why it's really, really important to take a break, to take a time out, talk it through with a mentor, a coach, or somebody like that. When I coach people, I do a lot of coaching on particular negotiations, and usually when they talk it through with me, I can come up with some just suggestions with a pretty common sense, which they hadn't actually thought of. So talk it through with a friend or whatever. We need a break, we need a time out. The problem with negotiations, as Ali was in this particular one, you were emotionally fed up, weren't you? Because you employ 7 physios and they were cutting the fee down and they were cutting the amount of time down. And you've also got to tell your clients who've been coming to you for a long time that they can only have half an hour instead of 45 minutes, even though they probably paid the same fee to the medical insurance company. So just going back on what we could take away from Shark Tank negotiations, the only difference between business and sport is that there's strict rules in sport. The strict rules in business are a bit loose, as we all know. At the end of the day, there are regulators, there are fines, but the Serious Fraud Squad have never ever had a serious prosecution. I don't think. Actually, that's interesting, isn't it? The new leader of the Labour Party was the director of public prosecutions for 5 years and got knighted for it, but they haven't got a very good record on that sort of thing. So in negotiations in Paris, be careful that you're not bugged. Don't be got under time pressures. Make sure you take a time out. If you're in a foreign country, take a foreign country cultural negotiator with you, somebody understands the culture and understands the language. Make sure you read the contracts yourself. Don't trust other people to read the contracts. You've got more skin in the game than a lawyer or an accountant that you are paying. It's your company and it's your business that's at risk. Expect to flinch, and I would expect you to flinch as professional negotiators. Always take someone with you to the meeting. If you are faced with 33 people, I'm not expecting that to happen at all. It's better that you've got somebody with you to give you moral support. And how can you take a time out if you haven't got somebody with you? And as we know, people who are disengaged from the negotiations, but on your side, will see, hear, feel different things in those negotiations. And finally, people are negotiating with us all the time. They're selling to us all the time. They're influencing us all the time. They're manipulating us all the time. I think it's a total insult to my house that Sky can turn the sound up on my television when the adverts come on. I think that is absolutely out of order. So we are faced with this sort of thing all the time. Number one, understand it. Number two, know how to handle it. And number three, take a break and handle it. Guys, that's all from me today. There will be a second session. I'm going to unmute you. There's no questions in the chat box. So if I could take a question or two from people, then we'll stop the recording and we will throw it open to anything that you want to ask off record. Will?
Did anyone watch that program about Amazon last night? Inside Amazon, all the tricks that they're pulling. And one of the things they said we can do is when we go into shops, is there seems to be some QR code or barcode, And what you can do is check the Amazon price versus the shop price. And you can actually show to the shop assistant, look, I can walk out of here and go to Amazon and get it for so much. And very often they will match the price while you're standing there, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah. Thanks. My son does that all the time with his phone barcode. Look at where you can get it to cheaper, and I can't be bothered with that sometimes. I go, Dad, you've got to do it. You know, you're a negotiator. Everything else. Another question. Anyone see that program Sunderland Till I Die? I'll come to you, Martin, in a sec. Sunderland Till I Die. Well, Jeff Ram, who was on here 3 weeks ago, told me to watch it, and he said, watch the negotiations with a player called Will Grigg. Well, Will Grigg changed hands from Wigan to Sunderland on the last day of the transfer window. Problem with negotiating at the last minute is the price will keep going up. But what they had, Sunderland had told the press that they were going to buy a striker, whatever happened, to get promotion. So they were in a corner. Wigan knew they were in a corner. Sunderland offered £1 million, and Wigan said that was the asking price, £1 million, and Wigan said we're not authorised to accept that. What does that mean? They said no. So they upped it to 1.25, and Wigan said we're not authorised to accept that. So they then upped the price to 2 million. By this time, Radio Sunderland is going wild. They're not going to sign anyone. It's a huge club up in the northeast, as people may or may not know. They get 44,000 people for a Division 1 game. That's the third division down. So it comes to the final day, and it's all on telly, and there's cameras showing this, and there's a chairman and the chief executive who are London boys, are in big trouble for being up in the north, having bought shares in Sunderland. And they end up half an hour before the transfer deadline ends, offering 3 million plus extras for a guy that was worth in theory the day before £1 million. Anyway, Will Grigg arrives at the ground. He said, I'm going to score 10 goals this season, get you promoted, all sort of cocky. So far, 18 months later, he's scored 8 goals, 2 were a penalty and 3 assists. And he gets booed every time he goes out to play for Sunderland. They were totally and utterly stitched up by announcing and playing all their cards in a negotiation. You've got to keep your cards close to your chest in a negotiation. Information's power. Ask more questions and listen to the answers. Martin, you had a question.
Not a question, Derek, an observation, if you allow me. I think having spent nearly 37 years in banking and going into that career with a sense of values, encouraged in me by my parents, my background, my upbringing.
No political views here, Martin. Or
no, I'm not. I'm talking about value. We're talking about being ethical.
Mm-hmm.
And then you find that you will, as you become more senior, get into situations where your own values and the values of the organisation for which you're working are in contradiction of each other. And that's when it gets very difficult, because often you're doing things or making decisions which you typically wouldn't if it was in your own personal life, but you're doing them on behalf of the organisation because that's the direction in which you're being pushed. And that is difficult. That is difficult to deal with.
Yeah,
and a lot of people can't cope with that. And if they choose to go down the corporate route rather than their own personal route, they don't do it very convincingly. So if they're using it in negotiation, it's not a convincing tactic because the body language will give them away.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Martin. Absolutely. And sometimes people say to me, I can't negotiate because I've got nowhere to go. I have no power. I never heard so much rubbish in my life. You've always got somewhere to go. And Martin reminded me, you can always resign. You can always refuse to carry out the wishes. You could always whistle blow, but you have to have a walkaway position. And a friend of mine calls it an FU position, but I'm not allowed to say what FU means. Everybody needs a walkaway position. If you haven't got a walkaway position, then you need to create one. I realized when I was working in banking, I didn't have one. So I then set a goal to make sure I had one in 5 years' time, which meant getting my debt down as fast as I possibly could. So I was in control. Guys, I'm going to stop the recording there and throw it open to questions. Just to remind you that we've got Jane Gunn. You haven't got another physio. You haven't got another exercise for us, Ali. I haven't missed one, have I?
No.
I don't want to be in. You're the last person I want to be.
They will. The answer's
so thanks for coming on. They were my 5 Shark Tank tactics from today. I have a list of 25 at the moment. I did want to ask you, do you think it makes a difference, the colour tie, if you wore a tie, that you wear when you go to a negotiation?
Yes. Red one.
Red one for John Lisby, probably because he supports Southampton, but I like wearing a red tie. It energises me, makes me look like I mean business. And what was really interesting, I was talking to Jane Gunn this morning, who will be on Wednesday. Jane was on a really important lawyers and barristers Zoom call last week where she was presenting, and there were a lot of presenters. She was the only presenter that dressed for success. When you go negotiating, you need to dress for success. They were all in their jeans and their t-shirts and everything else, and they were presenting at a lawyers conference to 100 people. 150 people. So I'll leave you with that thought. Any questions, please come in and ask me later. Send me emails, you know where I am. And I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday.